I'm Jordan.
And I'm Rosanna.
And on this podcast, we explore how to take life off autopilot
and relentlessly pursue a life worth living together. Hello, and welcome to Season 7, Episode 2 of the Relentless Pursuit podcast, Dangerous Things Carefully.
Yeah, so this is a phrase that captured both of our attention. I heard this on a TikTok, go figure, because it's a very quotable quote from, I'm sure, a much larger conversation. But this is where someone was talking about kids and talking about how, and I know you have the full quote there, but essentially like not avoiding danger, letting our kids avoid danger, but kind of leaning into it, but carefully.
Yeah, so the quote is, if you're going to make your kids tough, which they better be if they're going to survive in the world, you can't interfere when they're doing dangerous things carefully. And that is attributed to Jordan Peterson.
Right. So Peterson's background in politics aside, the quote resonated with us. So I remember hearing it, and then I forwarded that to you. And usually, like, we'll forward one another things and, like, kind of nod and then just move on. But this one stuck with us a little bit. And I think because that there's obviously a big piece of our parenting that resonated with us. But I think there's a piece of ourselves and our own adult experience that is worth considering in this, too.
Yeah. And some people say, like, I don't want my kids to be tough, or they don't need to be tough, or, you know.
Do people say that?
I don't, like, that it has, like, a negative connotation to it.
Oh.
And, they're not going to have to survive this world. There's nothing wrong with it. So you can kind of haggle over, like, the wording of it. But I think the intention kind of just behind this thought and this theory is that whether it's a child or an adult, children, adults, and leaders need to practice doing things carefully, doing dangerous things carefully, because that's where we learn and grow. And when I think about parenting, when I think about our parenting, when I think about like just the way that parenting has shifted, in the last, 20 years, are we giving our kids those opportunities to do dangerous things carefully, and what are they losing when we're trying to protect them from those things? So obviously we heard that statement and I totally agreed with it, even though like kind of agreeing with it made me a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah. And there's a limit to it though. But I do see the opposite side of it pretty frequently, just with some like mild interactions between parents and other kids just out in public, where the kids are really restricted from doing anything that is remotely dangerous. Because like what's going on, like a lot of those of you who aren't parents, it's hard to describe this to you. Those of you who are, like, can definitely relate. Like there's a hefty percentage of your parenting thought life devoted to imagining the bad things that could happen to your kids.
In any and every situation.
Right, even in impossible scenarios. And then, of course, like once your kid is doing something, like it's just natural to assess, like, can they get hurt? Like, what's the worst possible outcome? And then there's something in us, and maybe this is true to all parents, maybe this is more generational. There's something in us that like wants to like pull them back,
hold their hand,
the brink, whatever
move
it may
them
be.
From the edge of the cliff while you're hiking in Colorado, whatever it is. We're putting ourselves between our kids and what we sense as some immediate danger.
Right. So, and I think that's good for parents to consider too. It's like, okay, like we don't have to be reckless with our kids, but there's a balance between kind of allowing some degree of danger, but also doing it in a way that our kids can be careful with. It doesn't mean they won't have scrapes or bruises or bumps or tears, but it means that like they're not going to lose a limb or a life, right? Or something that we really think is going to be awful.
Right. I'm not giving my 4-year-old a chainsaw, but, I'm going to give him some scissors, and I'm going to let him like cut paper with scissors in a safe and manageable environment so that he learns how to, handle himself and how to use tools. And, I don't want my 4-year-old to be 9 years old and not be able to cut his chicken with a knife because it's too dangerous for him, just kind of assessing those risks. So when you had told me about this, I agreed with it. And then, I kind of felt guilty because like we have 3 boys, and like our boys are very different than our daughter is in some ways. And even so, their level of like wanting to do certain things is it's just different. And they're kind of, I would say, if you're a parent of a boy, you understand that they're off the rails at times. Like, it just seems like there is no thought process, and they're a little crazy, and they'll jump from things and whatnot. And so when they're doing things like that, I feel like they could possibly get hurt. Sometimes because of this quote now, I kind of step back and like let them, like, they're in a safe environment. I'm right here. Like, what's the worst that could happen? Like, we could like scrape a knee, we could fall down and cry. And, like, I'm always, as they're, engaging whatever could be going down the steep hill on a skateboard, I'm like, all right, like, just be careful,
Yeah.
pay attention. And trying to like kind of pull myself back.
It's funny, and I was thinking about, so I made a list here. Let me go through my list of things that I would consider like dangerous things that we've allowed our kids to do, and then I have some questions about that too.
Okay.
So I just made this list here. So one is playing with fire, which they don't do that often, but especially like when we went camping, like they spent a lot of time poking sticks in fire and like seeing what would happen, which is important. Like it's really, really tame. But like worst case, you could thrust a hot firebrand into your sibling's eye, and they could be blinded for life.
Wow. Remind me to let you take them camping.
Right, but right. So that's like an extreme fear. But it's like, okay, you're just playing with fire. Like maybe you're gonna burn your finger.
Well, and I think, right. So what we realize as parents is like, you're with them, you're like overseeing that interaction. It's like an intro to like, using fire as a tool for camping. And it's like, then
Taming nature.
okay, sure. But like, then when they get to the point where then they're camping with friends, or it's like something that they know how to do and something they can do carefully because you've taught them how to use it in a constructive way.
Yeah. So maybe that's a more practical thing. Some of these are not practical. There's that steep hill. I remember when our oldest was relatively young, he was riding his bike.
Oh yeah, the big green hill.
And he wanted to ride his bike down this big hill, and we're like, okay. And it was uncomfortable to watch, but he did it fine. He didn't wipe out or anything.
But I remember that conversation. You're like, well, let's let him do it. I'm like, he could fall right up, like he could go, topple over the handlebars, and it's like, right, worst case scenario, mom's trying to protect baby bear, and sometimes you pull them back.
Yeah. This is, for me, one of the scarier things on this list. Remember, on some of our vacations or hikes, we've gone next to like a pretty strong stream or waterfall. And the kid, like something about that, like kids love jumping from rock to rock and finding things to like throw in, and they get really close. So that's one thing that we just have to like stand aside and let them do. And let them do carefully. Climbing trees is pretty common. The kids see trees, and as long as they can grab the branches, they're going up it.
Yeah, and that's funny because like I feel like that used to be probably like a rite of passage for kids, right? Like people like our parents' age, right? Like what did they do? They like went to parks, they climbed trees, whatever. But like now, even if you're at a park and you see a kid climbing a tree, you often hear a parent saying, "No, we don't climb trees. That's not safe." Like,
yeah. Well, some of
so
it comes down to like private property too. It's like,
right.
Don't break the limb that belongs to the park district. Yeah. Here's another one we haven't done a lot, but with Leo we have a little bit. Watch something scary.
Okay.
So and there's a blurry line here between what's dangerous and what's scary. They're not the same. So some of these on the list are a little like, to me, danger is physical harm. But there's no physical harm that's going to come to like watching something scary. Kid appropriate still, but like he has a little bit more of a lean towards the zombie-esque kinds of tales. Another one is get in a fight. Now, I should add this caveat. I'm proud to announce for the first time on the Relentless Pursuit podcast that now 3 of our 4 children are enrolled in jiu-jitsu. And so this is something we can do as a family. Like we can learn carefully how to spar. And then, should a real situation come up, now we know what to do. None of us are any good. But
I was going to say, like, how to handle yourself and a body, but we're not telling our kids to go around and pick a fight.
No.
Okay.
But still, like, it's scary to, like, even in the safe setting of a gym with your instructor, to go toe-to-toe with someone else and train together. Because that other person, they're not trying to hurt you, but it's a live sparring match,
And now I've seen the kids spar, and, like, the whole time I'm like, Gosh,
Yeah,
like
we've
that
seen our
seems.
kids get flung and flipped over
Yeah, I'm
and
like
choked.
that
And
seems scary to me. Like I wouldn't want to put myself in that situation, but now we have 4 of the 6 of us who do that. So that's interesting.
all right, I have a couple more. I'll go through more quickly. Give a performance. Right, that's scary but not dangerous, but still like stand up in front of everyone and perform a dance or a song or something like that.
Well, and I think that's, when you're doing this list, like, yeah, it's not dangerous, but it's like putting kids in a situation where they could fail.
It's
Like
like
part of that,
part of it is like it's like social
risky,
danger in
yeah.
a sense, yeah. So it's not physical danger, but socially, like you're kind of putting yourself out there, jumping off the diving board or going down the fast slide or like whatever the case may be.
Right, treading in the deep end without a floaty, sure.
Exactly. This is classic for your real little kids climbing up the slide at the park. I've heard that's one that comes to mind where parents are like, no, no, no. Anyway, we went to Garden of the Gods in Colorado, and that's just like free climbing rocks of all shapes and sizes. There's no safety ropes. There's our kids enjoyed it because it's like, wow, we can just like this is just nature. We can go like climb. But then suddenly they're climbing like 30 feet up some steep rocky slope, and then there's no way to get down safely, and so they like leap onto another ledge and. I mean, I'm surprised none of our kids really got more injured than scraped knees.
I don't even know what to say to that, but yeah, I mean,
Yeah, but it's scary to watch. They'd be like, oh, I hope they get
scary
down
to climb
okay.
up and
Yeah.
go get them too, and they don't want to come down.
Right. Remember that ski lift that we rode in Tennessee up one of the Smoky Mountains?
I sure do, because I was having heart palpitations because I do not like heights, and
Right.
it was just kind of like an open lift.
Yeah, how are these things legal anymore? There's no seat belt.
There's no seat belt,
nothing.
there's
You're
just, like, this
sitting
little
on
bar.
a lift 200 feet above the ground.
And it was me, Juliet, and Leo. They were clinging to me, and I had my hands so tightly around the bar because I thought like one of them was going to fall out. But what was even scarier was that Jordan was sitting in the one in front of me with Jack and Roman. Roman, who was 2 years old.
A very squirmy
And
2-year-old.
squirming, and I was pretty sure I was going to watch him plummet to the doom. I came back in the enclosed one because I couldn't handle it.
Yeah. But I think our boys rode one on their own too, right? And it's a little scary, but they seemed fine with it. And you're like, as long as you sit still, like you're perfectly safe.
Just thinking about it is like,
Yeah.
I can't.
Let's see. I wrote down. Oh, here's another one. Like going to the park alone, because our kids have asked to do that, right? And for us, like that's scary. It's like you're going to be out of my sight. What do you mean? But I think it's a little dangerous to be out of your parents' sight, out of touch, and then you have to figure things out on your own.
Yeah. And what I hear most commonly with this one is it's not that I don't trust my kids to go to the park alone. It's like, less than a half mile from the house. It's like they can handle themselves, but now we live in a world where we can't trust the outside world not to interfere with our children. And
Yeah.
so that's where it gets a little scary.
Yeah, so most of those I'm like, okay, I veer on the side of permissiveness, but everyone, all the listeners of this podcast heard me clam up quite a bit during our phone conversation during season 6 when we were talking about whether or not we should give our kid a phone. And that I would say is similar. Like it's something that's dangerous, but as long as they learn how to do it carefully, then it's okay. And so that's one where I'm kind of like coaching myself up on a little bit to try to make sure we can put this dangerous tool in the hand of our kid, but teach him to use it carefully.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's my list. And I was thinking through those, and just like some of them are, I say most of these are ones that like the kids have initiated. It's not like we told them like, okay, like, go grab some sticks and poke it in the fire and see what happens. No, they just naturally do that. And kids naturally veer towards doing something that's kind of dangerous. And so I wonder why. Like, just why do kids climb trees?
Why do they throw rocks? Why do they? I mean, there's like a lot of things. I think it's just kind of learning and, like to manipulate their environment and what they can do and what are the limits of that. We have this like little, very small, like woody area right behind our house. And the kids like going back there and they like hit rocks on each other, not on each other, but like, against each other. And they're like, wielding pieces of branch and like, I can't see it. And so it doesn't bother me. And like, I know that that's probably a good experience for them just to kind of like be out there. Like, they're like, what are they? 100 feet from the house. I could look back there and see them, but they're kind of just like trying to figure things out. I don't know what they're figuring out. They're boys. But it's something about that situation that like they're kind of drawn to.
Yeah. So I was really thinking like, what is there about a tree that makes a kid think like, oh, I'm going to go climb this? But there is something for many kids that they're drawn towards it. And as long as they can, like we even saw this with our youngest the other day, as long as they can reach the lowest limbs, like they're scampering up it. So it's like this draw to be like, all right, how high can I go? How can I toe this line between, being a little risky, but also, discovering something about, I don't know, about the world or about myself that I couldn't if both my feet were on the ground.
Yeah. Well, and that reminds me of a quote. They were talking about this quote on the art of manliness. And so there was a write up on there. And it says, sometimes in trying to prevent bruises and broken bones, we as parents also inhibit our children's development of competence, confidence, and resilience, in pulling them back from firsthand experiences, from handling tangible materials, right, like fire or something else, and demonstrating concrete efficacy. We ensconce them in a life of abstraction rather than action. So we're constantly telling them, fire is hot, don't touch it. But like sometimes you just need to like experience something and like kind of play with it in order to kind of figure it out and understand that for yourself. I mean, I remember being a kid and my mom telling me a bunch of times, don't touch the stove because it's hot. I mean, I remember that vividly. And you know what I did? I touched the stove, right? It's like sometimes you just have to like learn, or you just put yourself in that situation, like to learn autonomy and to really see how resilient you are. And this was also a part of that quote. It says, by insisting on doing everything ourselves, because we can do things better than our children and more safely, we deprive kids of the chance to make and test observations, to experiment and tinker, to fail and bounce back. In treating everything like a major risk, we prevent kids from learning how to judge the truly dangerous from the simply unfamiliar. Which I thought was great. Yeah. Because, I've started to do that more with the kids, right? It's quicker and more efficient for me to do a lot of things around here. And that goes from anything from like, right, making their lunch or packing their backpacks for them or folding their laundry. And now I've gotten to the point where like I'm busier and everybody can help out. And so like they make their sandwiches in the morning. Jack and Leo in first grade never made a sandwich for themselves, but Juliet does. Right, as like a first grader. And so it's like I'm letting them hold the knife and cut their sandwich and do those things. None of those things are dangerous, and it's not because I'm lazy, but like, they're learning a skill there, right? And then
there's a degree of trust. Yeah, nothing about this dangerous, but kind of along the same lines of like learning to trust themselves.
Right. Or like, right, like even when the boys are like, oh yeah, we want to help make dinner, and then the same thing, like, okay, you're gonna chop this, or you're gonna boil this water, and so like, yeah, like it's an open flame, but they're old enough, so like giving them those experiences to kind of like test like how much they can handle and what they can do, what they're good at, what they like, right? And there's always some degree of risk, but nothing that's going to, kill them.
Yeah. So it's all about like assessing the age appropriateness of it. There's certainly some dangerous things that are just like obviously out of bounds for us too, where I don't think this justifies everything or even most things, but it helps us as parents like relax a little bit and really consider like what is the worst case scenario, and how likely is that? What do they stand to gain? We can't protect them forever. So what are like some of the lessons that they're going to get from experimenting with this that's unfamiliar but learnable?
Right. And even, now as the kids get older, like leaving them at home alone for short periods of time, like, right. It's like kind of just developing like that sense of like, do my parents trust me? How do I react in this situation? Like, can I handle this? Right. And there have been times where that's been proven to be fine, and other times where it's been, like that our kids weren't ready for it. And so, learning to assess that, but, our kids kind of learning along the way. Any questions that you have that you want to kind of work through?
I have really just one big question, but I made a list actually. So I guess maybe I started by answering my own question. I'd like your input too. So like, why are we having this conversation? Why is it important to do dangerous things? And I think your last quote was helpful, kind of along the same lines as why do kids climb trees? So I listed just a couple reasons. One reason is that the world itself is a dangerous place for a lot of reasons. So trying to help kids grow up in an environment that is not dangerous at all, or all of those dangers are mitigated, that doesn't really train them to proactively be involved in the real world. I also, thinking about that too, because a lot of like we're talking about dangers, like physical dangers, and I think some of those may be relevant when you're an adult. But I was thinking more about just like risk taking. You're not necessarily in going to be doing things that could cause you physical harm as an adult, but like you do get used to, like you were saying, like calibrating between like the dangers or the risks that are too much and the ones that are knowable. So that was the second thing that I wrote down, is the world is going to give us a chance to take risks, but if we're accustomed to taking them throughout the course of our youth, then we'll be accustomed to assessing them and perhaps taking them appropriately, right? Doing adult dangerous things carefully when we're older.
Okay.
I also wrote down that risks and dangers give us something that is knowable. Like something that seems dangerous is often dangerous because it's so, like you said, unfamiliar. But if we can take something and like break it down into smaller components or understand how it's tameable, then we see that the world is not like this big scary place, but it's full of things that are understandable with work and with effort and with care.
I like that. Yeah.
And then finally, the classic, why do we fall down? So we can learn to get back up. So even when you fail at dangerous things, like you come away with bumps and bruises and scrapes and blood and tears, and but you learn to like get back into it afterwards. The kid steps into the batter's box and gets beamed by a ball, and then he steps into the batter box at his next at bat because it doesn't mean
Because his coach has forced him to, because you got to get back in there. So it's not that the fear is gone or that the risk is removed, because he could get beamed again if it's a bad pitcher, on accident. But that you have people in your life encouraging you to step back into the box and take a swing, and that you're not going to let that derail you from playing the game.
Yeah.
Sorry, we go to a lot of baseball games lately.
Yeah.
It's on my mind. So I think those are all great. I think those are all great takeaways that, could be repeated, or, kind of be shared on social media. So I kind of phrased similar things in the forms of questions. And the first one was, why are we afraid to let our kids try things?
Yeah, it's more for our own comfort. We're like,
Right.
ooh, like I don't like watching this and imagining the risks, so I'm going to shut this down.
Right. Or I can't be there to supervise it, and I don't trust somebody else to do it, as good as me. And so I'm going to keep them from that. Or I don't want my kid to fail. And so I'm not going to put them in a situation where they're not going to do well. And I don't know like where that comes from. Like, does that come from not wanting it to reflect back on us,
Well, maybe.
or
You just
not
don't
wanting
want
to embarrass
them,
our
you want to
kids, or
spare them the pain.
But sometimes when we're so worried about our kids and teaching them what's right, and keeping them in safe situations, we don't allow them to choose wrong or make a mistake or get hurt or even play play on a losing team, right? Like there are lessons to be learned in all of those things. And sometimes when we kind of keep them back from that, we're doing them a disservice because they're not learning how to handle those situations and learning to like thrive and be resilient because of them. And so sometimes we'll keep them out of something completely, even if they're not ready for it, because we think that we're helping. Mm-hmm. How do we protect our kids without becoming helicopter parents? How do we, I think it's more of just like a mental push, like a shift, like, yeah, I want to keep my kids safe and I'm going to do all of those things, but how do we not become those parents that are like, have our kids on too tight of a chain?
Yeah. And that's hard because it's like every decision becomes like a mental exercise and maybe we could have prepared this, but maybe we'll come up with this sort of on the spot, but like a set of questions to ask yourself. We've already been asking like, all right, what's the worst thing that can happen? And sometimes like the worst thing is pretty bad. And then you have to ask like, all right, what's the likelihood of that happening? And do our kids know what to do in circumstance X, Y, and Z? And like, how do you like slowly like get them to experience the world in, for all of its dangers? That's hard because I think of certain requests our kids make or certain things they just naturally do. And every situation is different.
Well, and you're right, because there are times when we're pretty strict with what they can or can't do. And there are other times where we're like way lenient. And we'll be doing something even with my parents, and my dad will be like, what, you're going to let him do that?
Grandparents are the worst.
Right. Overly protective in some scenarios. And like my dad would even say like,
I see some parents too, just whatever any kid is doing, they're like,
Yeah. Well, that, yeah.
like, all right, relax, it's cool.
Their kid, a
It's
different
cool. Yeah.
kid, you know. And so, you know, yeah, it's interesting to see. And so a lot of times I have that conversation with my dad or even my mom who says, like, you know, I applaud the way that you parent sometimes because you're always careful with your kids, but you never hold them back. You let them know that they have the opportunity to, like, have a longer leash and you trust them. And she's like, and you should because you're raising them and they've demonstrated trust. But she's like, I know that sometimes it's scary. I don't know that I would have been able to do that if I were you. So, you know, it's just like that back and forth where
Yeah,
it's
it's like,
kind of what's right for you, what's right with your kids. You know, it's what they're ready for. So, you know, as a parent, if you find yourself kind of holding on too tight, like what are some of those questions you can ask yourselves? Are they ready? Are you ready? Because maybe your kids are ready and it's you as a parent that aren't ready.
yeah. It's like you can ask yourself, is there an opportunity to say yes in this instance? Or if I'm going to say yes, what caveats need to be added to this? If you're going to be doing this, then here's the way it needs to be done.
Here's one. Sometimes we're so worried about teaching and protecting our kids, but are we letting them explore and have fun? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's go hand in hand. You can explore, but do it like I think as an adult you can just see the potential pitfalls. So, yeah, like play with the fire and have fun. It is a lot of fun to be able to do that and burn stuff and just understand its properties, and not because you saw someone else do it, but because like you yourself were holding the stick in the flame, seeing what happened when you blow on it or when you put leaves on it, right? So you can have a lot of fun with that. But at the same time, like as parents, you could be like, okay, like don't bring it over by the gasoline, uh, right? Or
Life lesson. Yeah.
right. Or, you know, we're in a forest, so don't just leave it lying around near all the dry twigs under that tree, right? Because you can understand, like, those are the possibilities of something really going wrong. So you can do it under these circumstances. I'm just thinking of something much more mild, but like you kicking a ball over a fence and now you've got to go into your neighbor's yard. It's not really a dangerous thing unless your neighbor is some whack job, but right, still.
Oh my gosh.
But that can be kind of scary for a kid to be like, I'm going onto like someone else's property, going on the other side of the fence. There's a dog there. Like, okay,
Or I have to knock on the front door and confront the
I
neighbor
have to
and say,
talk
like,
to an adult. Yeah.
right.
So, okay, like it's totally doable, but here's the way to best approach this. Don't just climb over the fence. Don't knock down the fence. Right?
Last one, which kind of like, you know, it's part question, part kind of response, but I think it also segues into kind of like maybe something else that we can kind of shift in this conversation is, you know, are we pushing our kids in a healthy way, and are we modeling this in our own lives? Because I don't think this just doing dangerous things carefully is just about kids and about, you know, being able to ride their bikes to the park or giving them a phone or playing with fire or whatever it is. You know, I think this has a lot to do with us too. Whether you're children, an adult, a leader, we need to practice doing dangerous things carefully because that's where we learn and grow. So like, are we doing that in our own lives, and how are we doing it? Obviously it's going to look a little different than kids. So what does that mean? What does that look like?
I think that's the whole point. Like, if it has no application as an adult, then who cares if your kids are doing something dangerous or not, right? They might as well not if it doesn't mean anything. So that's really my last question too, was like, what are the parallels for adults? Like, if you're a kid who has the advantage of doing dangerous things carefully throughout your upbringing, what's the payoff when you're older? And so I tried making a list. It's a pretty lame list, actually. But I'm sure we all have experienced other things more personally. You could think of more to add. So I was thinking of like starting a business. Right, that's pretty.
It's risky.
It could be dangerous and risky, right? None of these involve physical harm, by the way. Even just changing jobs can be a risk. Like leaving the known, even if you don't like it, for an unknown.
Or a sure thing for the next thing.
Yeah. Moving can be a risk. A lot of people move, but you know, you're kind of just leaping into what is often has a lot of unknowns to it. I wrote down begin a relationship, whether that's a friendship, whether it's like a more intimate relationship, if you're going to start dating, like any sort of like social move that exposes you to some extent. I also wrote down like I don't want to say like breaking laws, but like participating in protests or standing up for something that you believe in, even if that means that you have to use your voice or like project yourself in some degree of a forceful way in society.
Okay. I think those are all good. I mean, what are ways do you feel like that we have done this in terms of like taking a risk or doing something dangerous carefully that's, tangible that someone could be like, oh yeah, like maybe I can try that, or maybe that's a next step for us.
I don't know, because sometimes the careful part like overshadows the dangerous part, right? Because you
Well, I'm not saying like, yeah, dangerous. You think like what, rob a bank? Of course not. But like, ooh, what else we are doing this summer? I think of you last year with wanting you telling me that you were going to join the jujitsu gym, and I was just kind of baffled. And then you went, and you were going a lot because it was, summertime for you. You're off of school for the summer. And every time you came home, something was wrong with you. Like you couldn't turn your neck.
yeah, you get
You
bruises
broke
and
you like broke a rib. You were bruised. Like you had like handprints on you. Like, and I was like, okay, you sure you want to do this? Like, you were doing something dangerous carefully, right? You're like in a controlled environment. You're learning how to like move, manipulate your body. You're learning how to like protect and defend yourself. And so, not that I'm saying by any means that anyone needs to like try mixed martial arts fighting or anything like that, but like that was something that you did like for you, and it just happened to kind of like fall in that category.
yeah, it's probably the only thing that we could list that is physical. But right, and other things we've talked about on the show, like you started your company, we've dabbled in real estate, I tried a different job or different role, right? And so these are all things that we try, but none of them. How would I say, like if they don't work out, like none of them are like gonna break us to some extent, because we're able to like carefully and test the waters before we just dive in and realize we're drowning.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when you said like, I'm going to buy a house and we're going to flip it. And worst case scenario is we walk away with it, like making no money and just getting the experience. Best case scenario is we can make some money for it. So when we were like mitigating that risk, I'm like, that sounds good to me. I'm like, what if it really goes south? He's like, we'd have to, like, I don't know how south it really could have gone, because that was kind of like a limited kind of risk, but like we'd have to like live with your parents until we were back on our feet. Yeah. And like, that was like dire case scenario. I'm like, I mean, I guess that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. A little embarrassing, but
Right.
So it's interesting to think through that. Like sometimes when we're like stuck in a rut or we're afraid to like take the next step, like, what season was that? Was that season 1 that we talked about, like managing risk and worst case scenarios?
Well, that was in, I think that might have been one of was either
blog
our
post.
third episode or something like that. It was because we had 6 questions we ask ourselves. Go check out that conversation. Everyone's a good one. We should probably listen to it again ourselves. I do have one question here. This comes up on a lot of lists for things kids should do, and that is to own a pocket knife. Should we buy pocket knives for our kids?
It's taking everything in me to be like, to say something other than no.
See, here's the thing where I would say no, but like I would trust our kids with it, because like what inevitably happens, like you have this tool and you learn to respect it. Except they can't take it anywhere. Where can a kid take a knife these days?
They can right behind our house in the wooded area and stab it into the tree trunks that are over there.
Right. And then they'll probably just lose it back there anyway. But like you can't, it's not like you can carry it with you. Right. And if you do, and if you take it out, all of a sudden it's like, whoa, like this kid has a knife. It's just not a societal norm anymore.
So, and that's the thing in a shifting world, right? Like what used to be normal for kids to do, right? Climb trees. Like now we're worried about if the park district is going to fine you for breaking a tree limb, right? Or having a pocket knife and, digging some stuff out of a tree, right? Like even kids who were dating used to like carve their initials into trees. Like if people did that now, like they might be arrested on, like depends. Park property for having a weapon. So that's why it's like, how do we teach them and train them to be good members of society while following the rules, while teaching them that, while knives are scary and can be used for bad, like how can you use this as a tool?
Perfectly ordinary tool, right?
Right, to go camping and to do other things like that.
Exactly. Anyway, so that was just one closing question. But I think the application is really there. Like, it's kind of twofold as adults. One is as parents, which is where most of our conversation was oriented. Like, where can we allow our kids to maybe do things a little bit more dangerous, but within an overall, like, safe context? But then as adults ourselves, like, is there any element of scare or danger in our life? And if not, then should be. What's the next dangerous thing that you can do carefully so that you can grow and experience the potential upside of taking that risk?
Okay, so confession. One thing I've never done. Go camping. I understand that this is not a dangerous thing and it can be done carefully. Mostly because it does not appeal to me. But like, I think a lot of times we live in our comfort zones and nothing great ever came from comfort zones. So maybe, part of the conversation is like, what box can you step out of and what can you step into to kind of like open the horizons, whether it's for your kids or yourself, to kind of move you out of, right? The very comfortable, suburban, safe, calculated, life that we live.
And camping is a softball because, I mean, you're like at the campground, at your designated like pre-grass cut
and that's scary
area.
for me.
Yeah.
And that's scary for me.
And when you go hiking, you're on like these you're at Starved Rock, which is where we've gone. You've got these pre-marked trails where half of them are paved, and but it is like obviously a step away from your suburban household. So like you're not really seeing nature red and tooth and claw, but like it's a great excuse to go play with fire and go. There's always like water there, so like crossing the rivers on the stepping stones and finding sticks, and there's a lot of bugs. I mean, so there's nature there, and it's a chance to dabble with those. So I think as an adult, like I wouldn't say that that's at all dangerous. It's definitely just new and unfamiliar for you. But for a kid,
but maybe that's what it's more about, like the new and the unfamiliar.
Yeah. For a kid, I could see like it's definitely, it could seem dangerous because you're little and now you're experiencing all these unknowns, and it's a great chance to play around with some of this stuff.
I have one big personal question for you in terms of doing dangerous things carefully. Within the next few months, both of us are turning 40, and you say that in honor of your 40th birthday, you would love to do skydiving.
That's right. I'm going to go skydiving in honor. Is that a way to put it?
I don't
in honor
know.
of me
to
turning 40.
ring in a new decade. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
And I have no desire to do that or even to be there because that freaks me out.
Yeah.
But like, I don't know.
I mean, to me, it's like it's scary, but
right. It's controlled. People do it all the time.
Right. It's not
yada.
unsafe. Yeah.
I don't know. Anyone want to go with you? Because you're looking for jumpers.
Exactly. Well, just watch Facebook. I'll put an open call on Facebook since most of my friends don't actually want to go. Maybe a friend of a friend or my friends' spouses or whoever is interested. So keep an eye out for that. And at some point, I'll put that out there and it'll be fun. So that for me is like, it's kind of like scuba diving that I did last summer. It's like, it's scary, but it's like within well-controlled circumstances to enjoy.
Yeah. I'll just continue to build my business. That's scary enough.
Yeah, exactly. To each his own. Or her own.
Or their own.
There you go. All right, well, thanks for joining us this week. Let us know what dangers you are carefully exposing yourself or your children to. And let us know what you think about some of our ideas and conversation today.
Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for listening to today's show. We hope you will use this conversation as a starting point for your own. We hope you're encouraged to think and act more intentionally.
If you want to learn more, you can visit our website, therelentlesspursuitpodcast.com, where you can find notes on today's show, plus additional blog posts, and you can subscribe to our free members list.
Please subscribe, leave a review, and share with your friends.
Facebook and Instagram are two great places to connect with us for daily doses of our quotable quotes, behind the scenes, and real-time photos, videos, and challenges.
Until next time, let us know how you are taking life off autopilot
and relentlessly pursuing what matters.